press the bottom.
Would everybody please take your seats and we'll get started. Good morning. I can't tell you what joy I feel today. In fact, the only way I can say it is that this is the day that the Lord hath made. We shall be glad and rejoice in it. Today marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. After extensive preparations, the posting for our job opening hit the street in early July. By December, we had met Bertie, and everything was quickly falling into place. By January, it was all over but the shouting. And on March 6th, we issued the formal call. So that may seem like a long time, but by Episcopal standards, that qualifies as lightning speed. And yet, it was a long time for our wonderful senior associate rector and our associate rector to carry us through this transition. So they have our warmest gratitude. So the happy conclusion of our search is due in considerable measure to our search committee, which was last year's vestry, consisting of Michelle Armitage, Aaron Bowers, Ted Cage, Rachel Colson, Matt Cunningham, Lisa Garnett, Tom Gustafson, Brian Glosh, Megan King, Gloria Manzo, Susie Mink, and Stephanie Kirkaru. But in greater measure, let's ascribe it to providence, to the workings of the Holy Spirit, who has brought us a remarkable priest and a delightful person to be our leader. Bertie, we can't wait to meet your family. We look forward to many more opportunities to deepen our relationship with you, to make ourselves known to you and to know you better. For now, though, I'll just borrow a phrase from a famous movie and say to you, Bertie, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Okay, hey, good morning, everyone. So I guess as a kickoff question, I want to ask Bertie, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and your family?
Small question, not much scope for an answer, really. Well, before I do, I want to say that there was a great litany of thanksgiving for the phenomenal clergy and staff of this church, for the amazing vestry, for everyone here. But one person got left out, who is our senior warden, Ted, who has worked so hard on this. I am forever in your debt. This has been such a delightful process. Thank you for everything. So I am depending on which grandparent you ask, a 6th or a 7th generation Texan. My family has been in Texas for a long time. I had the wisdom to get out, to go to college, and I was in Northern California for about 14 years. Spent some time in graduate school and my kind of second round of grad school in the UK. Spent some time in France. And then in 2012, my wife and I moved back to Austin so she could do her doctorate at the University of Texas. So we were debating between Columbia and UT, and my canon of the ordinary called the Diocese of New York, and they said, like, yeah, we have a website, check it out. He called the Diocese of Texas, and they were incredibly welcoming and friendly. And the canon of the ordinary, no stereotyping, just just my experience. That's all I'm saying. The canon of the ordinary said, we don't have a lot of movement right now, but I'll let you know if something comes up. And she called me a week later and said, I found your church. It is beautiful, amazing, warm community, incredible tradition of good theology, a community clinic with 3 full-time physicians, 2 social workers, all this great stuff. And I said, where do I sign? It sounds amazing. And she said, well, there's just one thing. And I said, whatever it is, it's not a problem. And she said, how's your Spanish? And I said, well, I did some in high school. I mostly did French in college. So if you're looking for someone to like preside at the occasional Spanish service, I'm in. But if it's like a monolingual Spanish community, I can't do it. And she said, well, why don't you, historically they've primarily had former Roman Catholic priests who wanted to get married. And so I have 2 of those for them to interview. Why don't you come and be my diversity candidate, just for fun. So I came and I interviewed and I fell in love with the congregation and I left kicking myself, study abroad in Paris, how pointless. Why didn't I go to Mexico City? And they called a week later and said, we unanimously called you as our vicar. And I said, I think you have the wrong candidate. Like, I'm the one who barely speaks Spanish. Long story short, over the course of almost 5 years, I learned to speak Spanish. And it was just a delightful, amazing experience. We grew a lot, we reconciled some things in our outreach ministry, we did all kinds of great things. And after that period, the canon of the ordinary asked me to speak to a church in Georgetown, Texas, which is kind of the northernmost suburb of Austin. And it shares this kind of Venn diagram identity. So you have Old Georgetown. It's a tiny Texas town with a 19th century courthouse on a 19th century square. It's where the rodeo happens and where the feed store is. It's also where you live if you work at Dell, Apple, or Google and want a really good school and a big old house. And it's also the 2nd largest retirement community in the country, Sun City, Georgetown. So none of these people agree on the identity of Georgetown. We were the only Episcopal church in the place, so it was wildly diverse. Every marker on the political spectrum, the whole church was there at Grace Georgetown. So we spent, after almost 7 years there, I went on sabbatical, and we had a 10-year facilities plan. So we had 2 campuses, and we decided that our sanctuary was probably the ugliest sanctuary in the entire Diocese of Texas. I think that's that's objectively true. So we knew we needed to do something about that. Our building needed a lot of repair for our historic church, and then our west campus was just in a storefront. So we needed land for that. So over the course of that 7 years, we did multiple capital campaigns and gutted our whole sanctuary, redid our whole foundation, replaced our HVAC, plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. And then we bought a $6 million, 17-acre property for our West Campus. And so in talking about this with my spiritual director, my bishop, my wife, everybody was like, okay, you either need to double down and spend another 10 years here building the building, or this is the point at which you can leave. So you need to do some discernment. So we were on sabbatical, and we were in Paris, and we were talking about what we would like in the next phase of life, just for our family. And so we said someplace with a lot of beauty, a lot of diversity, really walkable with like lots of culture, great museums. And I got this email from this guy, Ted, and he said, I would love for you to take a look at our parish profile. And I said, Washington, D.C. No, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for walkability, diversity, museums, and beauty. So, I mean, that's just I've never been to D.C., but I'm sure it's not that. But what I said was, well, I'm on sabbatical right now. Maybe we can talk in the fall. And I just fell in love with the people in the vestry that I Zoomed with. Someone in this room described St. Albans as warm but nerdy. And I was like, oh man, you are speaking my language here. Even though it's in this not diverse, not walkable, not beautiful, et cetera, city, maybe God is calling us there. Maybe we don't really know where we're meant to be. And then we visited, and obviously we were idiots because we were literally describing Washington the whole time. And just at every stage, this has been marvelous. So my wife is a clinical psychologist. She does PTSD and depression research for the Veterans Administration. My daughter is 8, Helena. My son, Augie, is 3. He's really into dinosaurs. What else can I tell you?
That's great. So I can attest to the warm but nerdy side of Bertie. He has a series of podcasts that I highly recommend people listen to, especially if you like the occasional Star Wars reference and other pop culture reference. It's excellent.
Thank you.
So I want to roll back the wheels of time a little bit and ask, what drew you to ministry, and what do you enjoy the most about it?
That's a hard question, because I think you're all crazy for not becoming priests. It's the best life. You get to be there when just after people are born, when people are dying. You get to think about theology, about serving the world, serving the poor. I mean, it's just, everything is great. So I love preaching and teaching. That's really core to my vocation. I've been a lecturer at two of the two Episcopal seminaries in the Diocese of Texas for the past 10 years, teaching church history. I love liturgy. I love the sacraments. I love just getting to hang out with people, people in crisis, people not in crisis. It's such a blessing, every aspect. I grew up in a very devout Christmas and Easter Episcopalian family. So every Christmas, every Easter, we were always in church. And I went to Episcopal schools. So I think morning prayer and chapel are just a big part of my formation. And I remember telling my father when I was maybe 6 that I wanted to be a priest when I grew up. And that always kind of remained plan A. I thought maybe the dream won't come true and I'll have to do something else. And so I played in a bunch of bands and I DJ'd for a long time and I was a photographer and did some stuff for magazines. But all that seemed like miserable failure in comparison to the priesthood. And just at every stage, I think, in terms of what I was doing in my home parish, volunteering in a hospital chaplaincy, volunteering on a faith-based crisis line, just everything so confirmed the sense that this is really where my passions and the needs of the world intersected. And so far, so good.
Very good. So what did you find appealing, besides the warm and nerdy, about St. Albans? And what made you accept our offer?
Sure. These search processes are funny because if you're looking at a job at, some state agency or Apple or whatever, you kind of know what you're getting into, you can experience that agency or that corporation or whatever. You get to meet some of the people. But these processes are so kind of sequestered that I really got to know the vestry well, and which was a delight. I got to meet the staff a little bit. I got to see the incredibly beautiful church, these wonderful grounds. And so a lot of what you're relying on is really just faith, just this sense that either God is calling you someplace or God is not calling you someplace. And just at every turn, it really felt to me and to Rahel that we were just being called here. In the first morning of my first interview with the vestry, I was doing morning prayer, and I use this app, Mission St. Clair, and it sometimes has a saint of the day, and sometimes they're the official ones, and sometimes they just kind of throw people in. I think there's there's not, we'd have somebody for today, let's take the Roman saint or the Orthodox saint or whatever. And the saint was a Roman Catholic saint, St. Francis Xavier. And there was a little biography of Francis Xavier, and it really just focused on the fact that his life was a kind of constant progression of feeling called to somewhere deeply unfamiliar, that he knew nothing about, but because God was the one calling him, he went and flourished and was supported in that call. And just time after time, there just felt like moments where I thought, this really just feels like the work of the Holy Spirit. This feels like the right place for us. And those moments continue like this morning.
I think we felt the same way, I love your wife. She's such a lovely woman with a great sense of humor, and I think that everyone in the parish is going to learn to love her.
Thank you.
As well. All right, so my last question, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So tell us one unusual and interesting fact about yourself.
I don't know. I think, this is very unusual and interesting, I think. So I was doing an event. I used to serve on the staff of the Diocese of California. I was doing an event at our cathedral, Grace Cathedral, in which we invited lots of unchurched young people into the cathedral for this kind of night of art and music. And this guy came up to me and said, oh, these you Episcopalians are so cool. There's so many like cool Episcopal DJs and I said, are you insane? Like, what, are you talking about like Hindus? Like, I don't know, who are these Episcopal DJs? Like, I DJ, I don't know anyone else. And he said, no, the best DJ I know is an Episcopal priest in South Carolina. And I said, you have to give me this guy's name. And so I met my doppelganger. His name is John Zoll. He's now the rector of a church in Bedford, New York. And we are on opposite sides of the Episcopal spectrum. He is snake's belly low, nary a vestment in sight, never does the Eucharist, only morning prayer all the time. But we have identical taste in music. And we're in the same doctoral program. And there were a few nights during our program at Swanee where I brought some musical instruments and we made a little song. And someone heard it and said, I want to put that out. And so, unusual fact about me, there is a record that just came out in December that's myself and Father John Zoll, two priests, doing this very mediocre electronic music that someone decided to put out on a record.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have some time for
Please.
Q&A. So, yes.
What's the name of your band?
So John DJs under the name Jazz, John Arthur Zoll, and my really, really clever performance name is Bertie. So it's Jazz and Bertie. Band may be glorifying it a bit. If we find another 6 nights in a row to make some music together, maybe we'll do it again. But it's not much of a full-time occupation for either of us.
Well, I'd like to know if you have a scriptural verse that has been important to you through your life and now. What is it?
It's hard to pick one. There are a lot of good ones. I think to me, the whole of Christian life is summed up in the summary of the law. So, we are called to love God with heart and mind and soul and strength and love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think St. Augustine of Hippo said, he who learns to love perfectly no longer has need of Scripture. In a sense, when you are on fire with the love of God and you are turning that fire outwards to serve absolutely everyone, you got it. I am very far from that, so I need a lot of Scripture. So I think if I had to pick one, it might be the summary of the law. I love the prologue to John. I love Isaiah. I love Genesis. The whole of the New Testament, I'm a big fan of. I think, you can't pick a bad one.
Right, can I ask, when people ask questions, if they introduce themselves first, just to help Bertie on the very long road to getting to know people? That was Amy and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome, Michelle
you.
Bond. I have enjoyed listening to your podcast, and I came in a little bit late to this introduction, so if it's already been discussed, I apologize. But would you speak a little bit about that and whether you have thoughts of continuing it?
Sure. So I do a little podcast called The History of Christianity with Bertie Pearson, another really creative title. If anybody's good at titles, I could use your help. So I began that during the pandemic. I did a Tuesday class in my parish, and it was just something that I really loved doing. The kind of 40 or 60 people who came each week, I think, found quite valuable. And someone said, could you do this on YouTube? And so I tried doing it on YouTube. It felt very awkward, unnatural. Nobody watched it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll try it as a podcast. Maybe 10 people will listen to it. So I started recording during the pandemic, and I think now it's at something like 140,000 downloads or something. It was easy to do this during the pandemic because I was in my office alone all the time. As we returned back to normal life, it just became very challenging to kind of block out hours for research, hours for recording, hours for editing. That being said, I would love to get back to it. So it's just a question of finding the time. But it's been a very meaningful, very fun thing to me. So I'm wondering if maybe there are sort of synergies with doing in-person things here that are recorded and putting them on the internet, or, who knows? We'll figure it out. But yes, I would like to in some fashion. Looks like there's a hand in the back, or... Sorry.
Thank you. Katie Wilson. I'm very interested in your decision to live in the rectory. And I'd like to know why. So, can you give us a little background on that?
So my former associate rector at my former parish, Grace, Mother Mary Ann lived 6 blocks from the church. And not only did she have the most spectacularly beautiful and easy commute in the history of the world, we were also able to use her home for newcomers classes. We used her home for parish dinners. It was so wonderful to get to invite parishioners into this space that was both a private space and kind of had a public identity. It just felt invaluable. And so I think for me, there's sort of a tendency in ministry, maybe there's sort of pendulum swings, but I think where the pendulum is right now in terms of having kind of professional and personal boundaries, there's this very strong sense that I'm a priest when I'm at work, and when I'm not at work, I'm just doing my thing and I don't want to be bothered. And I don't think that's true for most of our clergy, but that is something you kind of hear in seminaries today. And I don't think that's a very helpful model. For me, I think my goal in everything is having a non-bifurcated life in which I'm just the person God made me to be, trying to live out life in His image. And so to be able to step across the street early in the morning to say morning prayer in the church, to be able to have a pastoral meeting at 5, a vestry meeting at 7, and to go home between and give my son a bath. I mean, that just seems unbeatable. I don't know why one wouldn't want to live in that way. So it just seemed like there were so many potential blessings for my family, for my ministry, and plus, this is not an ugly place to live. Please. Oh, I'll let Mary do the mic handing.
So, John Daniels.
Bertie, I'm John Daniel Reeves, and how was your Oxford experience formative, if it was formative?
Oh gosh. So, our question was, how was my experience studying in the UK at Oxford formative? So, I did my Master's of Divinity at the Church Divinity School of the Pacific, which is in Berkeley, California. And I stuck around for seminary because I thought, well, all the seminaries are probably the same, what's the difference? Turns out they're all very different. But I was living in the Bay Area, I was playing in a band, I had close friends, it just seemed disruptive and unnecessary to go elsewhere. But it turned out to be not the best fit for me. CDSP is a wonderful institution in many ways, but in other ways it just wasn't the right fit. I think a lot of my faith tends to be grounded in kind of the writers of the early church, just the earliest Christian mothers and fathers of the church. And CDSP kind of came at faith from a much more, I'd say sort of 19th century rationalist perspective, kind of questioning everything and tearing everything apart, nothing about which is wrong. I think in a sense one has to be both deeply faithful and critical and broad thinking. But I found that kind of deep tradition was just lacking there. And so I went and talked to my advisor my first semester, and I said, do you think I should try and transfer? And he said, well, we are in the Graduate Theological Union, this consortium of schools. So why don't you find classes you want to take with the Lutherans, the Dominicans, the Baptists, the Jewish Institute, whatever it is, and I'll just sign any piece of paper you put in front of me. So I ended up taking there's a doctoral program in theology, and so I took the PhD theology classes, and I got this amazing formation, particularly in modern theology, but we read a ton of Barth, a ton of Rahner, all of Tillich, all of Pannenberg, etc. So I left seminary feeling like, all right, now I've had some really great Wittgenstein seminars, but I haven't really figured out how to be an Episcopal priest. So I talked to my bishop and told him this and said, is there any way I could have some more time in my process to go to a kind of very old school Anglican seminary in the UK? And he said, absolutely. So I went to Cuddesdon, which is our oldest seminary in the Anglican Communion. It's if you know Oxford is this like kind of extremely broad array of identities in terms of the institutions. They go from like a little house with 6 monks in it to a gargantuan college like New College or Christ Church or whatever. There are actual colleges, there are permanent private halls, there are like affiliate colleges. So Cuddesdon has its own funny little designation. So the degrees that they offer are the Oxford Bachelor's, Master's, and Doctor of Philosophy in Theology, and that's all they offer. So you can't take any other coursework there. And Cuddesdon is 7 miles outside of the city. It is structured like a monastery. There are 3 obligatory services a day, and there's just a real sense of like holiness of life there. It was this form of Christian community that I had never experienced before. There weren't cliques, there weren't really sort of individual friendships per se. Instead, unlike high school, you would get your tray in the cafeteria at the counter and walk into the refectory and just sit at the first open seat because all of you were in this sort of depth of Christian community together. It was, I think, worshiping together, living together in this way was utterly transformative. And then getting to study with Callistus Ware, getting to study with Roger Scruton, getting to study with Brian Leftow, all these phenomenal theologians was amazing. So it was a great experience all around, hugely formative. Mary, I'll let you be the judge of whose hand went up first.
Well, thank you. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
My name's Gib Kirkham, and I'm interested, Bertie, in the story of how you met your wife and the process to decide to get married.
Sure. I'll say long story short. She had been in the United States, so she did her undergrad at the University of Amsterdam, and before she started her master's, she decided to take a year off and study abroad. So we met after she had been in the United States for a week and a half, I think. And we met at an event. I was reading a book backstage. It was a music event, and she asked me what I was reading, and it was this novel by a writer called Vikram Seth. We started talking about books, and I said, are you a reader? And she said, yeah, I'm reading this book right now called The Seducer's Diary. And I said, wait, you're reading Kierkegaard? My all-time favorite? In a nutshell, that's how it went. So marriage followed as soon as it could possibly follow. When I went to the UK, she went back to Amsterdam, did her master's. We were long distance between Oxford and Amsterdam for a year. And then we were long distance between Amsterdam and San Francisco for a bit, eventually got married, and the rest is history.
Good morning, Bertie. We met earlier. A lot of you know I've been working with the Russians for 31 years, and I'm married to a very, very pious Russian Orthodox parishioner. Yesterday was St. George's Day, so she was at the church all day. But I spend probably more time over there at St. John the Baptist Church than I do here, mainly because their services are so long, and and it's also a chance to practice my Russian. But I just wanted to say, and I'll probably talk to you more about this, but I'm under incredible pressure to convert to Orthodoxy because, as you know, orthodoxy means right worship. And they are absolutely convinced that they have the absolute truth. But I always say to them when they get to me, I say, I can stay within my Anglican tradition and I can enjoy Roman Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Callistus Ware, whom I got to meet one time, which was a great joy. he did the seminal work on the history of Orthodoxy, and was a convert, as are many of the people over at St. John the Baptist. But I just wanted to say that I really look forward to I was really very happy to hear you refer to St. Francis of Xavier, of other traditions. And like I say, I always tell them, I can appreciate the Muslims, I can appreciate the Buddhists, and of course this drives them crazy. They won't even come into the Anglican church, much less a mosque. But anyway, I just wanted to welcome you, say Dobro Požalovat, as they say in Russian, welcome to you, and Christos Vaskrese.
Christos Anesti. In the early 19th century, you had Russians there were lots of Orthodox churches in Alaska, and you had Russians sort of coming down into the mainland of the US and establishing churches. And a delegation of Episcopalians went to these Russians establishing churches and said, you don't actually have to do this, because we're already the Orthodox Church in America. And they said, we've never heard of you. What are you talking about? And they said, no, we are the Orthodox Church in America. Look at our prayer book. And they're like, this does look pretty Orthodox. So they sent it off to the Holy Synod of Moscow, and Metropolitan, I'm blanking, but I'll remember the name as soon as we stop talking. Tikhon, Metropolitan Tikhon said, yeah, that's an Orthodox prayer book. It's only lacking the epiclesis. That is the moment in which the priest calls down the Holy Spirit upon the gifts. But if it had an epiclesis, this would be fully Orthodox. And so there were actually talks in the latter part of the 19th century between the Episcopal Church in America and the Holy Synod of Moscow about becoming in full communion. So I think it's okay to say to your Orthodox brothers and sisters, you don't have to do this, we're already the Orthodox Church. No, but I think that, aesthetically we are wildly different. I have no full beard or black robe, or, we're not coated in incredibly beautiful icons. But theologically, we have very few differences. Our ecclesiology is very different, but in terms of our theology, if you go to a modern seminary like St. Vladimir's in New York, a lot of the books you'll be reading are Anglican authors, because the way we differentiated ourselves from the Roman tradition in the Reformation was saying, okay, we're going to zip back past Charlemagne and past the rise of the kind of political papacy and get to the earliest Christian authors. And we're going to translate them into English. And so we have been in dialogue with the earliest Christians for the whole of our kind of Anglican experience, and that's kind of the root of Orthodox theology as well. So I think we have so much in common. We're very close cousins.
I just might add one thing. The Society of St. Sergius and St. Albans was very, very active and was very instrumental in supporting the Orthodox Church. And that, like you said, at one time there was even talk about, uniting as a single church. Unfortunately, the war intervened.
Sure.
Communism intervened. A lot of things intervened.
And we each have our own way of doing things. I think we have a blessed witness to the world in ordaining women and ordaining gay and lesbian people, and they don't do those things, and so I think we're all just serving Christ in our own ways, and it's beautiful. But come hear more. Who's next? Oh, great.
Oh, here's one.
Okay.
Dr. Kat Schreier, I think perhaps some of the folks with younger kids, maybe with those kids across the way, as someone who's coming with young kids, what are your thoughts on programs, ideas for your family, for the various generations that are here within parish?
I think one thing that was evident to me in the St. Albans profile, which I didn't address when you asked me about that, one thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis here on intergenerational formation. There's so much emphasis on incredible excellence in adult formation, incredible excellence in youth formation, and incredible excellence in children's formation, and that's hugely important to me. Selfishly, because I have kids who are going to be youth one day and adults, one hopes, one day. I also served as the Youth and Young Adult Coordinator on the Bishop of California's staff for 2 years. I think that's just really important. That being said, I'm not of the stripe that sort of makes changes without seeing what's there already. So I think for me, it's going to be just a question of like getting to know the programs, getting to know the kids and youth and parents, learning a ton from an actual world-renowned expert in ministry with young people, Emily, that we have here. So I'm really excited to support all those programs and to learn a lot about them.
This button. Okay. You have come to the nation's capital, and by choice. And I'm interested. We all know that politics has impinged on the church here. I'm wondering, in 25 words or less, your thoughts about the relationship of the church to politics.
You know,
Or government.
in my first year at Grace Georgetown, I was in southern Malawi, sleeping underneath a mosquito net. I was traveling for our Diocese of Texas World Mission Board, which I used to chair. And I'd been at Grace for like 3 months. This trip was already long scheduled. And I got a little ping on my phone. It was 3 in the morning. I was up, totally jet lagged. And it looked like a message from the Bishop of Texas. And I was like, oh, I better answer that. And I pulled it up, and it was a message to the Bishop of Texas from about 20 of my parishioners, CCing me, saying, you are lying to the world. These are not Episcopalian values. Your political stances you are taking, this is heresy, et cetera, because the bishop had signed on to an amicus brief dealing with advocating for basically greater leniency in asylum processes for people seeking asylum from Latin America, which is a major issue all over the country, but huge in Texas. And, you know, I'm coming from a church in which probably 85% of my folks were undocumented. So I have very strong feelings about caring for these wonderful families that I had gotten to know at San Francisco de Asís, and was very invested in those issues. And so initially I thought, oh dear, is this a coup? You know, are politics going to take over the church? This could be problematic in so many ways. And so when I got back from Malawi, I met with those people who had signed that letter. And when we started talking, I realized that all of us actually had the same perspective, which is that justice is important. And so the way one side of that equation defines justice is that we actually all do have to live in an ordered society. We have to have laws, and it's laws that actually make things function. So we need to respect legal processes. The other side of that conversation was there is justice that has to be done for these families because they are fleeing horrific situations. Like, we have to actually walk in justice to love them, to care for them. But everybody kind of had the same concern. So we started thinking together about how we could all be kind of sincere to that call to be just, even though we might disagree about how that's instantiated. And so what we did is we started a chaplaincy program in the Immigrant Detention Center 20 miles away from our church. And so every week we had a Eucharist, which started with the 6 people who still thought it was a Roman Catholic service and not an Episcopal service, and they were like, wait, what? But after doing it for 6 months, we had 125, 140 people every week in this detention center. And we would come, we would worship together, we would have a service of Holy Communion, and then we would just spend hours hanging out. I would hear confessions, I would have pastoral conversations, I would bless people. And some of those same people who had been so vehement about the immorality of that amicus brief were part of this ministry. And they didn't change their views. It's not as though they had this conversion and you were right and we were wrong. Not at all. But all of us were there as Christians serving other people. And so for me, it's not a question of the good people vote this way and the bad people vote that way. It's a question of humility and love. And all of us saying, we're all kind of messing stuff up in our own way. None of us has God's perspective. And so we're all going to try and walk with integrity to be dedicated citizens, to advocate for what we believe is right, and it's okay to disagree about those things.
Okay. So unfortunately, we have to end it there because we have to get ready for the 11:15 service. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming here
Thank
and
you.
sharing your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.